Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the time of year when we need to do some maintenance on our berries. I am right now in my raspberry row. This is the primary space where we grow raspberries, and we have about 25 feet of them in this space. There are a couple of different varieties, and we're going to treat them a little bit differently. So, how do we prune our raspberries? We have two different categories of raspberries, a couple different varieties within each category. There's the summer bearing category. These are the raspberry varieties that are going to give us berries all summer long. They're going to start producing fruit fairly early on. Usually early July, we start to get a nice harvest trickling in of these summer bearing raspberries, and they usually produce steadily until the frost comes, until after the frost actually. They'll produce into November, but at a much slower rate. They produce mostly in the summer and then just slow down and start trickling in berries. And then our fall bearing raspberries are the other category, and they produce a little bit throughout the summer months, and then you get a nice big crop in the fall. And we treat these types of raspberries differently. With summer bearing, they produce their berries on last year's growth. So the canes that grew last summer are the ones that are going to produce berries this year. And the canes that gave us berries last year, they're done. They're not going to produce berries ever again. So we are going to cut them out because having them in here just clutters things up, it promotes disease. Our fall bearing raspberries, on the other hand, I just cut them right down to the ground because that promotes a bigger crop in the fall. They produce their berries primarily on the canes that grow in this year. So there's going to be some growth coming out from the ground in a few weeks' time, maybe a month or so from now, and it's that new growth that's going to produce the berries for us. So we can cut back all the old canes, and it's going to promote a bunch of fresh new growth from the roots in the ground, and then in the fall we're going to get the big flush of those fall bearing raspberries. I do have them separated sort of, but I probably should have, if I'd had the space, had them in totally different rows because raspberries spread vigorously and they kind of are growing into each other. So I'm going to do the best I can here to discern which ones are the summer bearing and which ones are the fall bearing. Now, I've left these from last year. I didn't do anything to them in the fall. These are the old flowers, so where the raspberries grew out of. This was a flower and a raspberry. This is how I know that this was last year's raspberry cane, so it can come out. Now the rabbits came in and were kind of jerks. I mean, they're not gardeners. They don't understand that you need to leave the growth from last year in order to get berries this year. So they did chew back a lot of last year's canes that had not yet fruited, which means that your yield will be significantly diminished. I'm going to go through and try to salvage any of the canes that grew last year that had not yet flowered, and hopefully I can find some good ones that the rabbits did not demolish. I'm also going to look for damaged and diseased canes. We did have a few diseases through them, a pest and a disease last year. We had a rust and we had a raspberry cane borer. I mean, you're always going to get some of those borers. You just have to keep them cut out. But for that reason, I'm going to keep a close eye on these canes, looking for any diseases, get them really nice and cleaned up. We want great airflow in this raspberry patch when all is said and done. I'm also going to spray off my pruning shears with some alcohol because I don't want to spread disease throughout my food forest. All of these canes in here, I can't tell anymore if they produced fruit last year because the rabbits ate the tops off. What I'm going to do is just cut back any that have been severely damaged, like the rabbits have eaten the bark from all the way around the circumference, anything that's broken off. And then I think I'm just going to cut them back about like 12 to 18 inches in height so that there's a clean cut and I've removed as much damage as I can. I'm going to cut it at a bud if I can, just above a bud. It'll promote lateral growth out the side. Looks like the rabbits did that for me here and here. We have some haskaps here too, 3 haskap bushes. With haskaps, you need a pollinizer, so it's really recommended to plant at least 2 different varieties of haskaps. We have Aurora and we have Borealis, and they are just starting to come into their own. They're just starting to get nice and bushy. Haskaps can get like, I don't know, 6 feet tall, probably, like nice sizable shrubs. But in my experience, they're pretty slow growing. It'll probably be a decade before they're that big. I'm not going to worry at all about pruning these, mostly because the rabbits do a little bit of pruning for me every winter anyway. These are our currants right here, and they're red currants that actually came with this property. There was nothing here except weeds, like nothing except just so many weeds when we moved here in 2021. I think at one point maybe they had gardens or they had stuck some plants around the perimeter of the yard, but they were pretty neglected, and a lot of invasive species had totally overgrown them, crowded them out. And so these red currants were like this wonderful magical surprise. One day I was weeding out here trying to get all the overgrown invasive species pulled out of this property so I could start planting food, and I noticed this little red berry, and it turns out it was one single red currant. This currant bush maybe had 2, maybe 3, probably only 2 branches coming out of the ground. Like it was barely alive. It had almost no leaves on it, but it had this one little currant. So now that all the invasive species have been cleared out from around it, it's allowed to spread. It has some space. It has a little bit of sun, even though currants don't need a ton of sun. This is south, and so there's a fence shading it a bit, but it's fine. Despite the fact that it doesn't need a lot of sun, the sun that it has gotten now has really helped it to take off in growth. These currants are spreading by touching down in the ground and then rooting themselves, which is really handy if you want your currants to spread. I think I need to stop them though from coming this way because we do have haskaps starting over here. So I'm going to come in and just cut out the lower stuff of these red currants. So we really only enjoy currants for 2 things. One is fresh eating when they're one of the first berries that have come out. So the kids will just sit here and like pick them, and it's a fun first berry to harvest. And the other thing is to make cassis. So I think cassis is brandy. I should look it up again though. Brandy, and then you can soak usually black currants in it, but we've made cassis with all kinds of different colors of currants. You just steep them in this brandy for, 6 months or so, and then it's ready to go. So we do that. We make a bit of cassis. We do a bit of fresh eating, but I'm not huge on currant jellies, currant jams. They're fine, but I don't want to grow a bunch of currants just to make jams out of. We can make jams out of a lot of other fruit too. So for that reason, they're mainly here because it's like the first berries that you can eat, because they do well in a shadier space, but not because I am obsessed with the taste of currants. So I'm keeping them contained to this space. I don't want them to overtake where I've got haskaps because I much prefer the taste of haskaps. We're going to keep them pruned back. This is what I'm all about when I take care of my berries and my fruit trees. Keep them contained. If I had 100 acres of sprawling space, I wouldn't really worry about it. I would just let them take over. But I don't, so I need to keep things in check so everything can fit. I'm just going to come through and cut out the stuff that's laying on the ground, the lower branches. Encourage it to grow more upwards. It keeps your berries up off the ground, which makes them cleaner, less likely to be nibbled by mice and whatever little rodents are running across the ground, slugs, that kind of thing. Keeps them up out of that. This one is my pink champagne currant. I bought this when we moved in, and it is just a little bit dense. I found last year trying to pick all the currants, it was really hard to just get into the center of this. So I'm going to just do a little bit of thinning. All right, the last thing I'm going to focus on today is the grapes. I think ideally you would grow grapes on a horizontal wire. I think that they are more productive and efficient that way. We don't have that system, and our grape right now is just growing on this obelisk. So it gets pretty crowded throughout the summer, and then you get issues like mildew, and pests can hide in it a lot easier. So I prune this thing pretty heavily. I do what's called cane pruning on the grape, which just means each late winter I'll come and prune it back to 1-year-old canes. So last year's canes that grew fresh, I'm going to keep a couple of those, and I only keep 2, maybe 3. I think this year just 2 canes coming off the main trunk, and I'm going to make sure there's plenty of room for them to wrap around the trellis with space, because this summer they're going to put on tons and tons of growth. Tons of new little canes are going to come off of it. There's tons of leaf buds on here. It's going to be really leafy, and there's also tons of fruit that's going to come in here and clutter things up. So I'm going to keep it nice and thinned. You can also, of course, weave things with grapevines, but you got to get them when they're young and fresh. Looks pretty sparse now, but I promise you this grape is going to grow in really fast this spring. The one thing I can tell you with complete certainty is that there are a lot of different ways to do something and have it work out for you. So don't worry about it being perfect. I'm still very much learning how to prune things. I've been doing it for a few years solidly now. I have many years of experience messing things up royally in the garden. I learned through trial and error and through reading. And grapes are one of those things that's relatively new to me. I've only had this grapevine for 3 years. So, all the reading I can do and watching other people pruning on YouTube, this is still a unique grape plant on a unique structure. It's going to take some trial and error, and I will just have to show you how it goes throughout the summer. Thanks for coming and pruning with me. If you still have this garden task ahead of you, I guess be happy that we're getting winter-like weather, so you get a chance to get out there and do more late winter tasks like pruning raspberries and other brambles. If you have grapes, if you have berry bushes that need a little bit of a haircut or some upkeep, now is a great time to get out and do those tasks. As I'm trying to sign off, my eyes are wandering and I'm seeing other things that I forgot I still have to tackle, like my boysenberry over there. I might try to get a couple more little things in before I head inside, but it's starting to get cold. The snow is starting to fall again. Good old last week of March. Oh, and I also have my little deck greenhouse out right now. I've got some things in there. You can see there's condensation on it. It's nice because it's up against my brick wall, which gets southeast sun beating down on it, and does help to hold some of the moisture in. Anything that I have in here, though, I promise you, is very cold hardy. There's calendula, there's snapdragons, some lettuces, that kind of thing. So I'm not worried about it being out here. It is like 3 degrees Celsius, so it is slightly above freezing, even just in the ambient temperature. And we also have our spinach. This is last fall's spinach. Couldn't see it this morning because it was mostly buried in snow, but the snow is slowly melting again. It's just not going to stick around, I don't think. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I really appreciate having you along for the journey. Please click the like button if you like this kind of content. It helps me to know that this is useful information that people enjoy watching. And if you don't click the like button, I will assume that you don't want to see things like pruning raspberries. That's how it works. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you'll come and grow with us.